Hello and welcome to SweetSpotDFS. It's a DFS review video for the 2021 Charles Schwab Challenge where Jason Kokrak is your victor. This marks the second victory of Jason Kokrak's career and the second victory of this season for Jason Kokrak. So he's having a heck of a season. And I think, going forward, if Jason Kokrak is in that 8K, I don't think he'll ever be in the 7K range again, but as long as he's in that 8K range and lower, I think that's a easy play going forward because the putting woes that he had for most of his career seem to have been corrected. And with that, he's having this success. He's, a two-time winner now. So yeah, Kokrak is going to be an interesting play going forward. I think he's going to be probably a little mispriced for his first couple tournaments. But maybe I'm thinking the wrong way on that. Maybe Kokrak is one of those high quality players that we have to roster or think about rostering, in that 9K. I don't think he'll ever get to the 10K unless it's a really weak event. But yeah, Jason Kokrak, way to take it down. Before I get any further, I want to remind you guys there are timestamps in the description below. Those timestamps can also be found on YouTube's progress bar. So if you hover over the progress bar, you're going to find the timestamps. And you guys can skip around. You're not going to hurt my feelings. I'm putting there for your convenience. So use them at your disposal. But a quick summary, what I'm going to cover. I'll talk about results and recap. We'll look at the top 10, the leaderboard, and then move on from there to the GPP winning lineup versus the optimal lineup. And then with that, in that little section, I'm also going to be talking about the realistic optimal lineup and seeing if the bucket score or the bucket system could have netted us a lineup that would have beat, either the GPP winning lineup or would have been really close to the optimal lineup. So we'll go over that. And of course, we'll review the bucket system, look at all of the stats, all of the top 20 golfers in this field by each stat category. Maybe I said that wrong, but each top 20 stat. Okay. We'll look at top 20 of each stat in this field and compare it to the results. There we go. That's the way we want to say it. Just so you guys kind of understand that you shouldn't listen to people telling you want to find specific stats. Or I could be wrong. Maybe we will find stats that end up correlating to success. But that's my way of showing you guys. You don't like the lead-in stats. You don't want to fall in love with one stat category over another. So that's what I do. But yeah, you can find timestamps in the description below. Let's go over this. Results and recap. Jason Kokrak wins at 14 under. I watched a lot of golf on Thursday and the entire CBS broadcast on Sunday. Well, not the entire. I think I logged in around 12:10, so I missed like 10 minutes of it. Either way, I watched most of Sunday's round. I did not see Friday. I did not see Saturday, so I can't tell you about people who are missing the cut or people who played really good rounds to make the cut or anything like that. I have nothing really to offer there. And if I'm being honest, I don't really remember much of Thursday other than Spieth being hot on Thursday and being the first round leader. And then somebody else was the first round leader. I can't remember. Maybe it was Sergio. That's right. Other than that, I really don't have anything to even say about Thursday. But on Friday, Spieth, I think, started the day at 15 under, and Kokrak started the day at 14 under. And I think the next guy right below them was 10. So they had quite a cushion to work off of. It was a two-man show the entire tournament, but there was a lot of drama. I mean, there were three lead changes really. Spieth dropped a shot on the second hole, and that led to Kokrak tying for the lead. And then I believe Spieth actually bogeyed the next two holes, which gave Kokrak more of a cushion of his lead. Spieth came back. Actually, there weren't three. He ended up tying the lead. He ended up coming back, tying the lead, and then Kokrak took it back over and didn't let go of it from there. It came down to hole 18. Spieth was one shot behind. Both of them, I mean, Spieth, he drove it to the right rough. Kokrak made the first cut on the left side of the fairway, kind of had a little bit of tree trouble in front of him. Spieth kind of pushed the envelope a little bit. in that lie, it was kind of nestled down. I think he clubbed up or at least took the higher distance iron that he was playing. Ended up hitting it a little too far, made the water. So he obviously dropped a shot. He needed to chip in for par and hope for a 3-putt from Kokrak because Kokrak found the center of the green. Well, more of the front of the green. And Kokrak 2-putted par. Spieth did not make his chip, so he dropped one to bogey, and that's where you see the 2-shot difference. Hoffman had a hell of a round. I think he shot 65 on Sunday to get to 10 under. Patton Kizzire, I think, shot 67. Munoz shot 68. And I think Poulter shot pretty decent, too. Let's take a look. I don't remember off the top of my head. Poulter was 68. But you can see Spieth shot a 73, so he kind of, choked this one away. Hoffman, 65. Troy Merritt, also a 65. So those two guys played really well on Sunday to get themselves up inside the top 10, and for Hoffman, inside the top 5. Hoffman was one of those golfers that I talked about. He was on the thumbnail of the preview video, primarily because I just liked how his stats shook out. And once we get into the bucket system, he covered a lot of the bases of who we wanted and what we wanted. Other than that, I really have nothing to say. The leaderboard did change inside the top. I think at the start of the day, there were a bunch of golfers that were inside the top 10. I can't remember off the top of my head. I just know that Maverick McNeely was inside the top 10. And so was Tony Finau. Wherever Finau ended up finishing. There he is. We had a few golfers that would have made the bucket score look much better had they finished inside the top 10. And obviously they didn't. So I just know those golfers off the top of my head. Let's go ahead and get into the GPP winning lineup versus the optimal. Now, I didn't put a lot of money in this week. The $1 GPP is the highest entry fee GPP that I entered. And the winner there had a lineup that scored 556 points and used up $49,000 or $49,400. It consisted of Jason Kokrak, Jordan Spieth, and Patton Kizzire. So he had first, second, and third. I shouldn't say he. Could be a she. They had first, second, and third. Then had an 8th place Lucas Glover, a 14th place Taylor Gooch, and a 14th place Doug Ghim. The optimal lineup scored 599 points, so that would be 44 points or 43 points higher than the winning lineup, the GPP winning lineup, and he used up 49,600. So for those that have followed me before, I talk about a realistic optimal lineup, and that's any lineup over 49,000 that, is the optimal. The highest point scoring lineup you can, 49,000 over, because it's much easier building a lineup with, not leaving that much money on the table. So sometimes we see these optimal lineups at 47,000 or 46,000. It's, that's unrealistic. There's no way anyone's building a lineup there. So let's create a realistic optimal lineup. Well, this ends up being it. And it consists of Jason Kokrak, Jordan Spieth, Patton Kizzire, Sebastian Munoz, Ian Poulter, and Troy Merritt. Those last three probably not golfers you're pairing together with the top three, but the top three were really easy to get to. They were all plays that were, bucket plays and stuff like that for me. So was Munoz, but Poulter and Merritt really weren't golfers I was considering. So we don't have to look at a realistic optimal lineup. That ends up being it. So let's go ahead and move on. Now, the one thing that I want to do is look at the summary of the bucket system. And the reason why is I want to then go from the summary into just looking at the top 10. Let me just actually clear this out. Looking at this top 10 and reviewing the bucket system to see, can we build a lineup, using the bucket rules that would beat that $1 lineup or get really close to beating, well, it can't beat the optimal lineup, but let's see if it is, we can build an optimal lineup using the buckets. So very first thing that we're going to do is I want to show you guys which buckets hit, which ones didn't. So in this projected amount, basically, I talked about this during the strategy video. The projections really are using the success rate and multiplying that into how many guys are in that bucket for this field. So for this very first instance, for last year bucket 2 golfers, that's that 1 to 20 range from last year. So if they finish somewhere between 1 to 20, they fall under this bucket. Usually there are 19, per year. We have 19 this year, and a success rate at 12.23%. That means we're projected 2.32 golfers in the field. I always round down, and I'm toying with the idea of just minusing 1, rounding down and then minusing 1. To really get my projections, I feel, that are accurate. So with that being said, looking at all of the buckets, now there are 36 different, what do I want to call them? 36 different buckets, really. There's 6 categories of buckets, but they're really 36 different buckets. Of those 36, all the ones in red are those that did not hit. And we end up having 7 buckets that did not hit. 7 out of that 36. So most of them hit, meaning, it's all good. And by the way, for this week, how I did it, I did not minus the 1. I'm just rounding down. So this right here, this, we already talked about this, but the last year bucket 2, that projected 2.32, I'm just counting it as 2. I'm not looking at it, as a third of the golfer, looking at that 0.32. It's just not. I don't care for that. So I'm looking at 2. Now, some of these are, 0, and it being 0, meaning as long as that's 0 or 1, like I'm going to count it as a green. And I know that's kind of cheating, but I'm not choosing golfers from these buckets because the projected amount are zeros, which, there were some golfers that did finish inside the top 10 that fell under some of these buckets. Which we might want to play. So we'll review that. But if you recall, so that's kind of the review. 7 did not make it. That obviously means 29 out of 36 made it. That's a pretty good percentage. I am very cautious to say it was a success, but the anchor buckets that I chose was sort of, well, actually, no, it wasn't, was it? Last week 2s. So last week 2s didn't hit. So that wasn't a success. We did have 1, but for the most part, I thought it was, it was a good tournament or a good week for the bucket system. Let's go ahead and take a look. Can we create lineups using the bucket system? So the very first thing that I always do is remove all the zeros from the minimum. If you recall what the minimum is, a different way to read it would be of this category or of this column. If you look at each of these stat categories, so last week or last year bucket 2s, we've seen a minimum of 1, meaning at least 1 golfer every single year dating back to 2013 has finished inside the top 10 with a last year finishing position between 1 and 20. That's how it would read. So this would be basically just saying at least. We've seen at least this amount. We've seen at least 1 or more instances that this bucket's finished inside the top 10. So that's how I look at it. So right away, I would just take the zeros out and only focus on these 1s. And you can see some of these didn't hit. Actually, all 7 of our buckets are here. No, there's 6. I'm sorry. There's 6 of 7 buckets that didn't hit are here. What we could do is kind of do a quick dive as to see why that was the case. I will say this bucket here had 4 golfers that hit. So if we were to go ahead, look at last week 1s, if I clear that, take a look, there were 4 that finished inside the top 10. There weren't 5, so obviously 4 does not meet that projected amount. So it would fail. Technically, that would fail. But let's say course history 2s, obviously, we're looking for at least 1, and there isn't 1. If we just take a look here, there are not. But I guess if I were to open it up to 14th and 20th place, do we see course history 2? Yeah, so we see 1, we see 2. Nothing impressive. Like, I'm not gonna, take that as something we want. I'm not gonna take that as something that was successful. So that one, unfortunately, that was a bummer. That one failed. Nothing really close. For me, I don't remember if I actually chose this bucket to make sure. Actually, let me bring it up. Let me open the optimizer and see. I hope I have all my conditionals set, and if that's the case and this one failed, then that's on me. I did not do that great this week. So, oh, and I did. Okay. So I had at least one. If we look at the conditionals here. Course history 2, I made sure I had a minimum of 1. So I did not change any of these conditionals here. Course history bucket 2, there was 1. And let's see here. Which actually, you could build a lineup and do well. You could have the optimizer build a bunch of good lineups and it do well. But who was our course history 2 that finished inside the top 10? Or we didn't have one, right? Okay, I'm losing it. So either way, okay, so that's why I would not have done well. Now, I was toying around with the idea of, trying to figure something out between this minimum and this projected number. And now I think I know I kind of want to do this. I had mentioned that I was just going to minus this score here by 1. And actually what I was going to do is I was going to minus this score by 1. I was also going to minus that score by 1. And then add what it was ever left from here over here. And then that would be my new projected amount. So obviously for this, if we minus this by 1, that equals 0. Minus this one by 1, it would be 0.22. 0 plus 0.22 would be 0, if we're rounding down. Which means I shouldn't have played this bucket. Going forward, I think that's what I'm going to work on, is trying to figure out what is the right way going about this. And I honestly believe that's probably the best way. Maybe it's just -1 from both. Like -1 from here would mean a minimum of 1. -1 from here would be a minimum of 4. That would have hit. Obviously we saw 4. 4 would have hit. And I think then all of these would have hit. Let's see, salary. Actually, I don't think this one did, because I don't think there was a 9K that actually finished inside the top 10. Oh, there was. What am I talking about? Jason Kokrak did. So that would have hit as well. Because this, obviously, we only had a minimum of 1. We -1 from each. That means there's only 1 we want to select from. So that would have hit. It would have made a lot of these ones easier to hit. And that might be a cheap way to go about this. But then, obviously, if you see something like this, where strokes gained off the tee, there are 2 that you wanted to select from. There was 3 for the minimum, but projected was 2. -1 from here would be 2. And then obviously -1 from there would be 1. I don't know how to deal with that. Maybe it's just take whatever's, well, if the minimum is larger than that, you probably take the minimum. Strokes gained bucket 2, we have a bunch of them. And that's how I color coded it this week. I color coded all the golfers, all the buckets by the strokes gained bucket number. So there were 5 that finished inside the top 10. So that was actually a clear indication of picking it. But yeah, if you guys have a better way of doing it, let me know. I'd be all ears. I would want to find a more efficient or even a more optimal way of figuring this out. But, obviously using success rate times the bucket total isn't a super accurate, prediction of what we want to choose from. I also want to see the minimums. And the other thing that I actually want to look at now is also frequency rate, which means how often has this bucket finished inside the top 10, year by year. So it's just taking a year by year look and giving me a percentage. So if there wasn't a bucket that finished inside the top 10, that obviously would take from that score. So let me give you a better idea of what this would be. So 71.43% for last year 4s. If I were to go ahead and go to the bucket and look at last year 4s, I was kind of doing some work earlier. So we're looking at our last year 4s right here. If I take a look, there were 2 instances where there were 0 golfers inside the top 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when you do that, division or finding the percentage, it's going to show up at 71.43%. And obviously, if all of them have at least one under the year, that means there's a 100% frequency rate. So I'll be adding the frequency rate to each bucket going forward. I kind of want to I used to use this number quite a bit when building lineups. I wouldn't, basically how I would look at it is, of the last year fours, 71% of my lineups, I would make sure there was at least one last year four. And then the other 30% would be, or 29% would be free from that. I don't know how I really want to go. I remember that didn't net me the greatest results, but I also didn't have this kind of broad picture, or even not even so much a broad, but a specific picture as to how to build these lineups. So I'm going to try to incorporate that, and I think it might give us a little bit better idea of which buckets really are the ones you want to target, as opposed to those that aren't. I mean, not every 100% hit. This one obviously would have been the disappointing one. The course history 2s. Yeah, because I mean, we didn't have one inside the top 10. We did have one inside the top 20. So now, obviously, that bucket's going to move down from 100% to 86%, something like that. Because obviously didn't hit this year, and obviously that minimum will go down to 0 now. But oh shoot, that's the other thing too. I forgot to look at this. Average per year. How many are in this year? So obviously a big difference, 14 golfer difference. That's probably the reason why it didn't hit. So definitely consider that. But moving on, could we have built a lineup using the bucket system that would have beat the GPP winning lineup? So I do have the GPP winning lineup here highlighted in blue on this page. Now, when we look at each bucket and we want to choose a golfer, to me, first of all, let's start here. These are my anchor buckets. These were the buckets that I told you in the strategy video to focus around. I even had said something like, okay, Charlie Hoffman almost was in every bucket. Same with Justin Rose. So like Hoffman was in 3 buckets, 3 out of the 5 buckets. He was a golfer that, you would want to choose from. I think it was, first of all, it was Patrick Reed who had 4 buckets, and it was also Justin Rose that had 4 buckets. Those were the guys that I liked the most. So if I go ahead and highlight Patrick Reed, he had 4 or 5 buckets. He couldn't have been in all 5. The most that any of these golfers could have been in was 4. Now, Patrick Reed didn't do the greatest. Justin Rose was flirting with inside the top 10 for a long time. He also had 4 out of 5. And those were the only golfers of the ones that I had anchored, the buckets that I had anchored. Let me say it a different way. Those were the only golfers of the buckets that I anchored that were in all 4 that you could be in. Otherwise, there were a couple that had 3, like Hoffman. I don't think Kokrak had 3. I believe he only had 2. Yeah, so I mean, he was in 2. So of the golfers that are here, obviously we have Jordan Spieth, Jason Kokrak, Charlie Hoffman, Emiliano Grillo, Adam Hadwin, and Brian Harmon. Those are your individual golfers. I think that ends up being 6. Yeah, 6 total golfers. I guess if I were to copy them, put them right here. Can't do it that way. Okay. But those 6 golfers, if I try to put them in a lineup, it's not possible. It's too expensive. So that was, Spieth, Kokrak, Hoffman, Grillo, Harmon. So Hoffman, Grillo, Harmon. I'm at $44,800 already. So obviously DraftKings doesn't go anything less than 6,000. If I just add 6,000 to that score, it ends up being 50,800. So you can't build a lineup from the anchor buckets that I chose. Now, if we were to look at it from the way that I should have and say, all right, let's -1 from each score and then see, the projected amounts. I don't have a field that's going to do that, but let's go ahead. Yeah, I wish I would have calculated that. Anyways, let's say we want to start with last year twos. We want to select one golfer that's a last year two. Well, let's go ahead and use Kokrak. So right away, we can use that. It's perfect. So we can say he's our number one guy. Obviously, this one didn't hit, but actually, last year ones, there was one guy, wasn't there? Yeah, I gotta stop looking at it that way. Kyle Stanley. I wasn't gonna choose Kyle Stanley, if I'm being honest. So let's skip that. Kokrak. We'll skip this one. We'll skip all the reds. Sure. Well, I don't want to skip all the reds. I should have really created that. My bad. Okay. Anyways, moving on. The next one I would want to choose is last year ones or last week ones, because obviously if we did -1, that would equal that projected one would be 4. There were 4, and at least there were more than one. You know, that's the big thing, is there was at least more than one. So what we're going to choose, let's choose 4 last week ones. I know that's kind of cheating in a way, but I'm going to do that. So I have Kazire, Merritt, Glover. Well, Stanley now shows up twice. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll select those guys. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 5 golfers already chosen. I'm not going to choose course history 5. How about a course history 1? Charlie Hoffman would be that guy. So this wouldn't be a realistic lineup, I don't think, because it just looks like we're leaving too much money on the table. So let's see, it'd be here, those guys, and that guy. That equals 46,500. Like, we're not doing that. In fact, I'm just going to get rid of Stanley and put in Spieth. Oh, we can't do that. It's 50,600. Shoot. I really should have narrowed this down even more. How about this? Let's go ahead and get rid of all those that have just 1 and just choose those with 2 and above. Okay, so we're gonna start over. I'm sorry about that. Last year 2s. Kokrak, boom, got it. Last year 1s. Let's select 1. Last year 1. Stanley, sure, whatever. Did not play. So 1 for here. We'll select Kazire. Look at our course history 1s. Select one guy from there. Course history 1. We already know that was Hoffman, so we can go ahead and choose Hoffman. Course history 3. That's Poulter. I already know this is going to be a lineup that is too cheap. And recent form 2, 1, or 3. Well, recent form 2, recent form 1. Yeah, well, we can skip that one. Salary 2 or 9K or 7K. We already got a bunch of 7Ks. We have our 1 9K and a strokes gain 2. So we already have our strokes gain 2. So we can select whoever we want from there. So it was essentially these 5 here. That's 39,900. That equals, darn, can't include Spieth. So it's almost impossible. It's ridiculous. So the bucket score, I'm not coming up with anything that's going to get me there. I know, I mean, Spieth out of all of these, there's not actually, okay, so wait, whoa. He was a last year 2 as well. So yeah, we could include Spieth, and then just go from there. So let's do that. All right, so Spieth, yes. Kokrak, yes. Kazire, yes. We already know those 3 golfers were in our lineup before. And in fact, I'm already looking at it now. I already know that Merritt is going to be in it, recent form 1. So he was a recent form 1. So we include Merritt. And we already know Poulter is in it. Is Munoz in it? Recent form 3, last year 3, or last week 3? Well, he's a strokes gain bucket too. But let's see if he's a recent form 3 at all. Okay, yeah, recent form 3 is in there. So we're going to go ahead and select that. And there you go. We pick the lineup we already knew was the optimal lineup, essentially. So hold on here. Did I select? Oh, yeah, 49,300. I have no idea why I put 49,600. Doesn't make any sense. Yeah, 49,300. Okay. So yeah, it works. Our optimal lineup could be built by the buckets, so it works. That was a long way to get there. I apologize for that. Should have done my homework prior to. So my bad. Anyways, moving on. One thing I like to look at, obviously looking at the top 10 here, is the SweetSpot score. So let's go ahead, remove. Actually, should I keep the top 20? No, I want to just look at top 10. Very first thing I look at, the actual score, which obviously I covered in the strategy video. If they all equal under a 100, that's a good start. Now, there are only 120 golfers in this field, so I might have to relook that. Maybe I'll just look at the like 50% and below. So obviously there were 121 golfers in this field, I believe. So obviously looking at the top 60. So how many did not finish? Or how many of these are not in the top 60? 1, 2, 3. Everybody else was in that top half for the SweetSpot score. We obviously have our number 1 ranked golfer in Jordan Spieth. But from there, I mean, it's a good mix. I don't really have anyone else inside the top 10 for that score. But as long as everyone else is under 60th, that's pretty good. Merritt was not, and he was in the optimal lineup. Glover was not, and he was in the GPP winning lineup. So there's kind of issues there. And then Stanley was 84th. So we can go ahead and not really think much about Kyle Stanley in that situation. So yeah, it all worked out there. SweetSpot score looked good. Now here's the other thing I want to talk about. I'm going to include everybody because the one thing we discussed was basically tee time pairings, but we broke it down even more than just all tee time pairings. If you look inside the top 10, the golfers that are highlighted over here were golfers that I talked about in the strategy video during the tee time pairing portion of it. But digging a little bit deeper from there, if we just look at all of those that were colored dark green and go by their games, you can see these are all split up by threes now. You know, there's one group, here's another one, and obviously the last one. So, you know, this is 4 threesomes that started out. And like the PGA Championship, I said there was at least one guy that finished inside the top 10 in all of these groups. But because that tournament was a major championship and the strength of field was over 900, the strength of field for this one was just over 400. So it was half. We see half inside the top 10. But I will say this, at least one golfer from each finished inside the top 20. And if we do get, you know, bigger groups that we can talk about, not bigger groups, but more groups we can talk about. And I said, hey, we might have one golfer from each of these groups finish inside the top 10 or even inside the top 20. I think you would take that. Now, we can't get to the optimal lineup without selecting golfers inside the top 10, really. But if there's a consolation prize, maybe this is it. Maybe this will work for you. And it will be interesting to look at strength of field moving forward and see how well these groups progress. You know, like let's say we have a strength of field tournament. It's not going to be next week, but maybe that Palmetto Championship. Maybe the strength of field is like 200 at that tournament. If that's the case, you know, we do see 4 groups here. Maybe we see 4 groups there. But we can accurately say we're only going to see one of these guys inside the top 10. And if it ends up shaking out that way, then we kind of know how to look at this moving forward. But either way, Spieth in the optimal lineup, obviously, and Kazire in the optimal lineup. Now, if you were to choose between Kazire, Connors, and Jones, I'd probably pick Connors at least 50% and then split 25, the other ones in half and go 25% of each. That's the case. That's how I should be playing, right? Maybe I get into a Kazire Spieth lineup. Like that would be pretty pretty good. I don't know if I get to like Jason Kokrak, but it's an interesting way to look at building lineups off of tee time pairings. And if that becomes something that's kind of, that becomes consistent going forward, then I'm definitely going to hammer that through moving forward. But yeah, really interesting to look there because obviously that includes the sweet spot rank as well as the tee time pairings, which, obviously turned out pretty good. You can see over in this column here, anything that's highlighted means their golfer was better than field average. And that also goes with who I select, who I highlight over here with when it comes to tee time pairings. So, there were obviously a majority of these guys that were highlighted inside the top 10 than those that weren't highlighted. In fact, only 3 golfers were not highlighted. You can see Poulter, Adam Hadwin, Kyle Stanley. Those are the only 3. And of the rest of the guys, they were at least better than field average in one stat. But if we remove the 2 golfers that only had one stat, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 of 13 golfers having better than field average stats for both DraftKings points and scoring average. And that's season long for both of those stats. So, that ended up working out pretty well. Of course, we have these guys that did not. So that's obviously something to take away, having to look at. But this isn't the end all be all. I'm not selecting golfers just because they have these stats. If these other golfers finish inside the, have bucket scores that you want to choose from. I mean, Stanley had 3 that you wanted to choose, right? He had recent form 1, last year 1, and last week 1. Last year 1, last week 1, and recent form 1. He covered 3 buckets. Like he was believe it or not, he was a quality play. And I never would have looked at him that way because it's Kyle Stanley. But hey, those 3 things, they match up. Hadwin, on the other hand, only had 2 buckets I think you wanted to pick from. Course history 1 and recent form 3. So course 1 and recent form 3. I think that was it. Otherwise, his last year and last week's stats weren't that great. But hey, he hit in 2 buckets. So that's obviously something to look at. And then Poulter actually had pretty decent bucket scores too. Course history 3 and 1. Let's see, course history. Yeah, course history 3. Of the course history buckets, 1 and 3 were the only ones that you wanted to play from. Really, like not only, but ones that you wanted to lock in. So yeah, course history 3. What was he again? Recent form something. Recent form 1. Yeah. So it was just those 2 buckets you want to select, but he was also a 7K golfer, which makes it all the better too. So yeah, I don't know what else to say. It kind of plays out into our hands. So that's something also to look at going forward. Let's go ahead and look at every stat that we kind of covered, top 20 in the field for each of them. So we're going to start here with grass stats. Overall bent, as you can see, here is your finishing position. What we want to look at is, of these dark reds, which are missed cuts or even withdraws, how many of those compared to top 10s? So we have 4, and then we have 1, 2 golfers that finished top 10, but in all reality, we had a bunch of top 20, much more top 20. And honestly, looking at the top 20 here of this stat category, there are more that finished top 20 for this tournament than there were missed cuts. And that to me is a success. So bent grass stats, something obviously to look at, or something good to look at. Top 10 bent percentage. There are more missed cuts than there are top 10s for sure, but top 20s looks pretty good. We have 2 guys in the optimal lineup. That's the other thing I should have looked at here. We have 2 guys in the optimal lineup here as well. Was it just Poulter and Spieth both times? Yeah. Okay. And then your 2020 bent grass stats, we have 3 guys that are inside the top 20 because this guy down here also counts. So Poulter, Kazire, and Spieth. So, you could at least select 3 of your optimal lineup guys looking at bent grass stats. But those are your top 20s. And it's a good stat to look at. Again, like seeing all of this, we see a lot of top 20s. More, just as much, maybe a little more or just maybe a little less than missed cuts. But yeah, we see enough. Let's move on to the strokes gained stats, because that is what everybody likes to talk about when they're trying to figure out which golfers to play. So our top golfers off the tee, you can see on the screen, and there are definitely more top 20s than there are missed cuts. So that was a good stat to look at. Again, anything colored in green is good. Anything colored in that dark red is bad. So it works out for off the tee approach. Ooh, a lot of golfers leading into this tournament with good approach stats inside the top 20 of that tournament. So yeah, approach and off the tee. Here you go. The first time I'll say it, this would have been a good tournament to select good ball strikers. Like looking at the lead-in stats coming into this tournament, it made sense for this year for this tournament. I don't know if it really makes sense for other tournaments or other years. Definitely something I think I'll look into for next year's tournament here. So yeah, ball striking, that actually played out pretty decently. Around the green, do we see anything? Yeah, around the green stats as well. Maybe this is just a cream rise to the top. And then putting stats also. 3 guys right here inside the optimal lineup having good putting stats. Looks like we have what, at least 2? Approach actually only has 1 guy that was in the optimal lineup. We had more guys in the optimal lineup for around the green and putting. And yeah, so off the tee, yeah, more top 20s, approach, more top 20s, but around the green and putting were your guys that were inside the optimal lineup. So that's very interesting. Let's take a look here. I never really covered this, the recent form versus baseline, but we do see a lot of green. So that means they're playing better recently than they have in their baseline. There's just so much to cover for all of these stats that it's hard to, take into account what is important and what isn't. There's still more processing for me to do when it comes to that kind of stuff before I really roll out anything like that. Here's one thing I really wanted to take a look at. I added these stats after talking to you guys in the strategy and in the preview video. I wanted to take a look, actually it was these 5 stats, if any of these kind of correlated, comparing green and reg versus 1 putt percentage, that kind of stuff. And really looking at 1 putt between, this would be 5 to 10 feet and this would be 10 to 15 feet. So green and reg with bad putters, I want to see, again, these are lead-in stats. So it's not like this is what happened at the tournament. But I wanted to take a look to see if there was, again, any correlation. Because if we have a high green and reg rate, anyone that's really highlighted in green means they're pretty good. You can see there's a 9-point difference between someone who's, bad in this field versus someone who's good. Here, let me take a look. So your best green and reg golfers, not great. Best proximity golfers, sure, not terrible. Best 1 putt percentage, okay. How about 5 to 10 feet? And actually, this number is of putts in that 10 to 15 range. What's the percentage of these putts that make up the 1 putt percentage for what they have? And that's the same thing that applies here. What is the percentage of 5 to 10 footers that make up of the 1 putt percentage? So obviously Michael Gligic, most of his 1 putts, 35% of his 1 putts come from that 5 to 10 range, meaning he doesn't really make that many putts outside of 5 to 10 feet. Now, if he had a high green and reg and a low proximity, those stats would go well together. So that's the other thing to look at that. If the green and reg is high, we can anticipate the 1 putt percentage not being as high. But like green and reg with 1 putt from 10 to 15 range, that's probably a good place to start. I don't even know if we even have anything like that. I don't know. This is something I'm going to have to look at in the future. I'm kind of just spitballing it as I'm talking to you guys. So definitely something I want to consider. But like the 1-putt percentages, obviously we see a lot of yellow and green, meaning it's at least middle of the pack, if not, towards the top of the pack. The darker red colors are going to be your worst golfers. Henrik Norlander being the worst 1-putt percentage. Well, Cameron Champ being the worst 1-putt percentage. And I'm probably going to keep saying that as I go down, right? 35.33, sure. 36.52. Oh, no. The lower the number, the worse. So yeah, it was Henrik Norlander. No, I'm going to take that back. It was Cameron Champ, 32%. 1-putt percentage. It's not good. Even when you have a high green and reg, it's not good. So I'm going to try to figure that one out. Trying to see why, or if those things correlate that well. I'm trying to figure out if I can use like a score to figure this out. So 103.66. How about this? Let's do this on channel right away. I want to equal sum of this and this. It's just, don't worry about the color. It's not going to look pretty. And see, we sort top to bottom. Interesting. Bunch of missed cuts right here. But this, wow. Very interesting. Just one optimal lineup, guys. So that's obviously something to take into consideration. Well, Poulter is actually on the opposite end of this. 103.7. So he's like 4 points below like Jordan Spieth, which, I mean, he ends up being the 31st golfer from the bottom. And he's in the optimal lineup. And then Troy Merritt's just behind him. So, yeah, that's not going to be something. I mean, maybe it's something to add just to boost some of those guys. Because obviously, seeing something like this with, that's pretty decent. Okay. I'll look more into this. Maybe you guys, let me know if you have any ideas of how to look at that kind of stuff. Because obviously 1-putt percentage is something that, it's obviously the likelihood they're going to make make a putt from the green. Justin Thomas, that's crazy. His 1-putt percentage is 43%. Not the highest in here. So here's also how you can look at this. If this 1-putt percentage is high, they're either missing greens, chipping really close, and then making their putt for either par or birdie or whatever, or they're making bombs from all over the place. And like JT doesn't have a very good 1-putt percentage inside 5 to 10 feet or inside 10 to 15 feet. I wonder if they have a stat inside 5 feet for your 1-putt percentage. I'd probably add that too then. I don't know. We'll see. Just an experiment. That's what I like to do. Add little new things here and there just to double check. Oh, here we go. Forgot I added these stats over here. I really don't know what the stat is. I can't even think of it off the top of my head. I mean, it's 1-putt percentage plus the percentage between 1 to 5 feet. I don't get how that equals out to be 175.23. It's because I added this stat. Okay, so if I were to delete this, now okay, makes sense. Got it. I don't know what that's obviously this is the lower the score, the better. That means they're making putts from further away. That's what that means. There's 2 inside the optimal. Okay. Is it the lower number the better? No, opposite way. Higher the number the better. Yeah, that doesn't give us any answers either. Okay. Well, worth the exploration. I wanted to see what that ended up being like, but I have nothing else to add to any of this. So it was interesting looking at the stats there. I feel like we're closer to, let's put it this way. I always think the bucket system is wonderful. It provides a lot of reason. I should say a lot. It provides very specific reasons to select golfers, and it allows us to understand the variety that you need in order to build the optimal lineup. Now, if there's a way that I'm trying to hone it down even more, trying to get it to a more of a pinpoint spot. And I think perhaps the way to do it is obviously minusing 1 from, the minimums as well as the projections, and then really selecting the buckets that we see at least 1, for minimum, and then seeing 1 for this. I know it's hard to see that with obviously this colored red, but we did have 1 golfer finish inside the top 10 this year. I know you can't see it on the screen here, but we did see 1. So obviously that one would have hit, and that would have been a good one to choose from. So yeah, it's definitely something that I want to look into, because obviously if I can give you a more specific and accurate selection of golfers to choose from, we're going to have more success doing this. And like I said, only 7 buckets failed to hit. And that's primarily because maybe I don't have the proper way to go about selecting golfers from, or not selecting golfers, but trying to show you which golfers you need to select or which buckets to target, that kind of stuff. So anyways, moving forward, yeah, I think we're going to get this honed in, and hopefully before the US Open. The other thing now that I'm talking about the US Open, that reminds me of, I think I will have a semblance of the website to provide you guys, and it definitely will be one of those things that you can get the optimizer off of. So I think that's how I'm going to start this, is obviously become a member of the website, and then with being a member, it's going to automatically give you access to that optimizer. It'll be one of your perks of being a member, and not so much just being a member, just creating a login account basically. So anyways, I'll have all of that figured out hopefully before the US Open. It's good to have tomorrow off. Obviously salute all your veterans out there, with it being Memorial Day. And with that time off, what I will do is get cracking on that website, and also probably get out the preview a little sooner and work on that strategy video. Not so much video, but the pieces to the strategy, so I can get that out earlier on Tuesday. But other than that, I've got nothing to add to the show. So with that being said, thank you for watching. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I will see you in the preview tomorrow for the Memorial Tournament. All right, bye.